I remember I was out of town, I think, and you sent it to me, and I looked over it, and I was like, "This is weak." Now I'm like, I'm not trying to be mean, but this is what you would say to me. This is weak. And at that point, I was like, okay, I can't write a resume. Let's not pretend like I can write a resume. And no shade to you, but you can't write a resume either.
Let's make green together. Let's make green together. Let's make green together. Let's make green together.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Black and Brown Make Green. I'm Natasha.
And I'm Damian.
And I am so excited about this episode because I feel like it's so relevant to today and to what a lot of people may be going through, which is centered around getting a new job.
Getting a new job.
And one of the last episodes we talked about how you had been hired for a new job. And that process was actually a year-long process.
Yeah.
So from deciding that the goal was to look for a new job to when it actually happened, it was a year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I think a lot of your coworkers were surprised whenever you announced to them that you were resigning.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a surprise or a shock to us because like it was literally a year-long plan. Like when we made goals for 2022 going into 2023, like that was one of the things that we were working on.
Yeah. At least the consideration of getting a new job. It's funny because you talk about goals, and actually the goal wasn't just that. That was kind of an extension to the primary goal. Mm-hmm. So the real goal was to stay employed.
Yeah, well, that was the goal, yes. Number one was stay employed because we knew layoffs were coming. Like you felt like these writings were on the wall. And they did come in 2023. They came through lots of companies and a couple of times in your specific division of your company.
Yeah, it's funny because all of the tech jobs, all of the big name players in the tech world, and even small name players, medium-sized players, are going through the same things. They're reshaping the way they do business. They're cutting people that aren't contributing to the goals and to the output that they seek.
Putting them on these PIPs.
Yeah.
Is that what it's called? Performance improvement plans?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been rough out there, especially for tech workers, but also I think it's happening in other sectors as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of universal right now.
Because I know I see on LinkedIn people saying, I've applied to over hundreds of jobs and it's been 7, 8, 9 months that they've been applying. And it's crazy. That's crazy to apply to that many jobs.
Yeah, so we've talked about this before, but one of the things that we do when we get into the new year is we try to make goals. And that's for Natasha, that's for me, that's for our kids. And we do it together. We work on it together. And they're all writing a bunch of stuff down. And it's very concrete and precise. And I'm trying to think about goals that I have. And I have some side goals like read more books or, do something self-improvement wise. But then I get to my work and I'm like, man, what could I do this year? I could stay employed. I could do everything it takes to stay employed. And that was my goal. That was one of the things that I wrote down.
That was. It may sound surprising, but that was the goal. But then also you were thinking about making a transition because you were looking into doing Rust development or some other type of development than what you do right now. Mm-hmm. And so I know that was part of that exploration phase too. So, which is one of the reasons why it was a year-long process. Yeah.
For those that don't know, like, To be a software developer, I'm a software developer. To be a software developer, you kind of pick your path. And with your path, you have tooling, you have programming language that you use. And it's all kind of this little bubble that you operate under. And I was looking to change my little bubble into something else. And, if you consider your high school click phase, it's like going from a jock to an emo kid or something like that, right? Like you just kind of make a lateral movement. You're still doing the same things. You're still operating the same way. You just do it differently. So that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to consider alternatives. I'm an iOS developer, if that makes any difference. I make iPhone apps. So I was trying to figure out, well, do I want to be doing this, for perpetuity? Do I want to start doing Android development? It's a possibility. Do I want to do web development? I was considering all these different things, and to me, I like to consider it like similar to what doctors do. You go to the doctor, you go to a general practitioner, and then if you need a specialist, you go into, I don't know, whatever specialty that you need, right? What's one of your specialist doctors that you've gone to, Tasha?
A foot doctor.
Foot doctor. Yeah, what are those called? There's a name for them.
Podiatrist.
Podiatrist. So you have a general practitioner, you have a podiatrist, you have all these other different kinds of disciplines that are very specialized. And it's kind of the same in my world, right? So I was trying to consider, do I want to make a transition into something else? And there's a lot of work that comes into making that transition. It's not always necessarily easy.
Yeah, and that's pretty much where it started, was just kind of this exploration phase of what do you want to explore? And from that, you started like writing different code and trying to make different things. And I don't know the terminology. So, whatever. You were trying to write something in Rust or whatever languages you were considering moving into.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that the journey began with you applying for jobs or looking for companies that you were interested in. It was more so, what do I want my next step to look like?
Right.
And there were a lot of conversations I remember that you and I had where I was constantly asking you, so what do you want to do, Damian? What do you think you're interested in? What kind of work do you want to work on? Do you want to work on a project management app like you're already doing right now? Do you want to work on something else? So it was very much a lot of exploration of just trying to figure out, what do I want my next steps to look like? If I'm going to change into something, do I want to stay in the same type of role that I'm in, or do I want to try to transition to something else? And I think that's an important phase to kind of dig through if you are wanting to make a transition, because you want your next transition to be the best next transition for yourself.
Right.
Or that's what I would want.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the way that you say that, you were kind of probing into what my intentions were. You made it seem like that it was kind of like a buggy thing, like, you were bugging me with it. But you weren't, right? That was actually really helpful to help me decide and to kind of anchor my decision points in reality and, make it more intentional. So I was very appreciative of that. And you also gave me the flexibility to like explore a bunch of things and kind of help guide me into that, right? So I was glad that happened that way, and I was glad to have actually taken the steps to explore these different things.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we don't necessarily ask ourselves all of those deep questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't even know what questions to ask ourselves, because I know I'll go out with this one friend, and I feel like every time I go out with her, I take away something that I need to do with my kids. And it's not even like she gave me specific advice, but just the conversation we had, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the next step I need to take.
Oh yeah.
So just having some conversation around things can help elicit the next direction for you to take. And so I think that's what a lot of those conversations were about, is just you trying to figure it out of what you want to do. Not me telling you, well, why don't you do this? It was more like, what are your interests? What do you want to do? And trying to get down to the root of that, the answer of that, I guess. But so from there, then I think you started kind of looking at different companies. So, and first you were looking at jobs that had Rust in them.
Yeah.
And so I won't name company names, but I remember there was a company in Canada you were looking at that has Rust developers, and you really like the product that they make. And so you were looking at that. And then I think you may have applied.
Mm-hmm.
But then they got back to you and they had already fulfilled the role or whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think after you started kind of exploring that, you started looking into the Rust development, but then you also were thinking about your interest.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you kind of moved away from changing languages at one point to sticking with iOS, but going more into a field that you were more interested in. And I guess we didn't say this, but you transitioned into fintech, which is financial technology, which obviously you're interested in because you out here talking about it all the time.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny because this was actually kind of the starting point to really moving in that direction, to really fleshing out the ideas to be able to transition into that, right? Because like I said, as a software developer, you have the tools that you work with. And then you have the domain that you work under, which is, like whatever you're writing software for. So I was previously writing software of a certain type. Now I'm writing something completely different. And now I have to learn how to do that something completely different. And it just so happens to be financial related. And that's the reason why I wanted to go there. That's the exact reason why I wanted to go there. And this podcast was the start of that.
Yeah. And some of the other things you were looking at, besides just looking at your interests, was looking at the company and the company's values, and do they have a remote opportunities or flexible working arrangements? What kind of benefits do they provide? Because all of that stuff is really important as well. You know, it's hard to balance life, I think, when you have a family. And I think you were also trying to find a company that would allow you to kind of have that balance that you wanted too.
Yeah. And if you think about the timing, I think that the timing is pretty key. Because like you said, the plan started a year ago. And a year ago was like when things were starting to firm up after COVID. I feel like companies were starting to transition back into the normal ways of operating. COVID really shook us up, right? Like, let's not lie about that, and let's not fail to acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. I guess not lie, but let's not fail to acknowledge that, because from one point to the next, very quickly, we had to pivot into working remotely or mostly remotely, right? And there's a lot of benefits for workers when that happens. There's having the flexibility to work, slightly different hours that maybe you work a little bit better for, or maybe you can have a little bit more flexibility to spend more time with your family. You don't have a large commute. There's all these benefits for COVID. And then after that, companies were starting to
return to office.
The RTO.
What do they call return to office?
Yeah. RTO. They're starting to RTO, and it's happening now too. But it's been happening for a while. Like the writing has been on the wall if you're willing to read it for a while, right? And that was, about a year ago. Like, you could just tell the things were changing. And then layoffs started happening. Layoffs, the reshaping of just divisions of companies, like a whole bunch of shakeups, right? Mm-hmm. And that scared me. That was one of the things that scared me and started making me really question, like, oh, am I well equipped to go out and get a new job? And I feared that I wasn't. And I'm the sole provider for us, except for your business, which is getting off the ground, right? Mm-hmm. So, I felt like there's a big duty that I have to serve for you, my family, right? Mm-hmm. And because of that, I felt a little bit under-equipped to go out and find new jobs. So I started thinking, ideally, in an ideal world, I would have wanted to try and do something new. And that's why I was exploring Rust. That's why I was exploring Android, or basically anything different, right? And in the end, like, the thing that I gravitated towards was using the same technology, using the same tools, but doing it under a different domain. So you're doing it in the fintech space.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to hear your thought process of how you went from wanting to try something new, but then also having to take in all those other considerations of providing for the family. And I think that can be hard for people when you are transitioning or wanting to make a transition of, oh, but I have this job. It's pretty secure, secure as it's going to be, so to speak. I mean, obviously nothing is secure. Things can happen at any point. But I know that can definitely hold people back from transitioning sometimes. And I think that's why we often talk about the importance of having an emergency fund so that you can allow yourself to be able to make those transitions, and making sure that you are spending less than you make each month and putting some away so that you are paying yourself and you're not just paying everybody else, spending all that money that is coming in. And so that was one of the great things for us, is that we're in that space that you could make that transition and not worry for at least a good chunk of time. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the money. Speaking from the standpoint of, if you had been laid off, we wouldn't want you to resign prematurely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do understand like the difficulty that you probably felt when you were trying to decide, like, I want to make this change, but I'm also the sole provider for the family. So yeah.
Yeah, that actually that made it a little bit difficult to change for me, even though I had really wanted to try something new, try something different, and I didn't quite know what that was, that being different aspect of it. I just wanted something different. That I feel like that decision point was delayed. You know, like it took a year, right? So I feel like that decision point was really delayed because of that. You know, I don't want to take a step back. I don't want to hurt the family in any way, you know, things like that.
So let's fast forward a little bit because, okay, you go through all this thought process and then at some point you actually start looking for jobs.
Yeah.
And I would actually say I started looking for the jobs because I feel like I was the one sending them to you.
Yeah, you actually were. That's funny that you say that. You actually were, because I was kind of living in that realm of I don't want to do anything that could jeopardize, you know, the family's well-being in any way.
And honestly, I was sending you jobs based on everything you said you were interested in. So I wasn't just sending you iOS jobs, but I was sending you Rust positions and things that you said you were interested in. And so that you were able to sift through those jobs and then decide, okay, this one's interesting. I want to apply for this. This one's interesting. And tell us a little bit about how you organized the job queries that I was sent to you.
Well, first of all, I mean, if you consider Natasha as being one of the best financial coaches like I do, I would also say that she is also one of the best recruiters, because she was sending me extremely relevant jobs. And she's not a software developer, but she's, you know, she listens to me babble about things. But she was sending me stuff that was highly relevant and very in tune with what I had told her that I wanted, right? We had these discussions ongoing. So she was sending me these job requisitions that were very, very relevant to me. So, I mean, I would just save them. I would keep them.
You were using some program to save them in. I can't remember what you were using at the time. Was it Linear app?
No, it was Notion.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was using Notion Notion's a note-taking app.
I think a lot of people know what Notion is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, I was just writing them down, and I was
saving like the links to them and
I would sort them. It was funny because I would sort them based on what I was very interested in, and I didn't act on them very quickly. Like, she would send them to me and then I'd kind of sit on it. You know, I was still in that phase of like, I don't need to change anything. I'm fine. But I'd start stack ranking them, right? So, you know, like, oh, I reread this job posting, and I think I could get down with this. I think this is really what I want. So I'd move it up, right? And then this other one gets knocked down. And then eventually I had my list, and then I started applying.
And I think you may have even applied to a couple before you got organized with your list. And I just remember you applied to one, and I think they said they had already filled the position, but check back at a couple of months. In a couple of months, they said they were going to be posting something else. And then you applied to one and didn't get a response. And then you may have applied to another one or two. And I think you had one or two interviews in between that time too. But yeah, I remember you started to apply to some. And then after you applied to some of them, we started looking at your resume.
Yeah.
And we were like, this needs some work.
Well, you know what they say, right? You don't start with your first, right? You don't start with the one you want the most first. Because you do need to, you know, shake the cobwebs off. You've got to, you know, dust off your jacket. You've got to get into the rhythm. You got to get practiced. You got to be ready. And I feel like that's what those first were, right? I was like circling around the campfire. I was dancing around it. I was figuring out how life has changed in the interviewing world in 9 years, basically. And then I did take a look at my resume after you gave me some really negative feedback.
Listen, I just gave you what you give to me when you look at something and it ain't doing what it should be doing.
Yeah. My resume was not was not all that.
Yes. And so once we looked at your resume and it wasn't on par, there was this one position you're really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And you were like, okay, I got to fix my resume before I apply to this one because that was the one you're really interested in. And you worked on that resume for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it wasn't solid working on it. It was working on it on the weekend.
In the between times.
In the weekend, yeah. Like I worked on it pretty solidly on the weekends whenever I was working on it.
Yeah, in the between times. And then I remember I was out of town, I think, and you sent it to me and I looked over it and I was like, this is weak. Now I was like, I'm not trying to be mean, but this is what you would say to me. This is weak. And at that point I was like, okay, I can't write a resume. Let's not pretend like I can write a resume. And no shade to you, but you can't write a resume either.
Yeah, this is how we talk to each other, guys. This is weak as hell.
And so I started thinking, okay, neither one of us can write a resume. What can we do? We looked even at someone who had like a template to use, and we tried to do that template. It was not working out. We weren't getting anywhere. And so then I was like, well, why don't we look for a resume writer?
Yeah.
And so I found this resume writer who's local here in Austin, sent her to Damian and said, hey, what do you think about using this girl? And he was all for it. And then that was the next step in this year-long process, was to hire a resume writer.
Yeah.
Which is not something that I think I'd ever considered before.
Yeah.
But once we were looking at, you trying to get this certain position and knowing how important it was to have a strong resume, because I don't know about other people if they've read some of this stuff on LinkedIn, but even just the other day, I saw someone who's a hiring manager, and they said, we were getting 800 applications for one position
in a day.
In a day. I forgot that part. Yeah, in a day. And it's like, that is insane. And yes, a lot of them are not qualified. Mm-hmm. On one person's statistic, they put that 80% of them are not qualified. But still, that is a lot of applications to weed through. Yeah. So your resume needs to be tip top. It needs to have the keywords and the phrases, whatever they're looking for you to get snatched up out of that pile of papers. I mean, obviously it's digital now, but y'all can imagine.
Yeah.
So, and that was the thing. We decided to hire a resume writer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's along the lines of what I like to consider build versus buy. You don't want to build your house yourself from log cabins, right? You don't want to build your car. You want to go and buy something, right? You want to go buy your car. You want to buy a house that's already pre-made. You don't want to design it. This is one of those things, right? A lot of the things that we do, Natasha and I, we were traditionally trying to do it ourselves. And that's why I think that we wouldn't have ever considered this before. I'd never considered it before, and I've been working for a while. 'Cause I ain't gonna
spend my money like that.
Yeah. First, it's acknowledging like, oh, this service exists that could help me. And then 2, it's, oh, this service exists that could do it much better than I can, but still give me the true representation of myself.
And it's worth the investment.
And it's worth it.
I think that's something that I've had to come to the conclusion of, like, some things are worth the investment. Yeah. You don't need to make everything from scratch. You don't need to do everything yourself. Sometimes it is okay to pay for things. So yeah, that was definitely an investment well worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was a lot for me, but it wasn't that much in the grand scheme of things, right? Like, if you consider the amount that I paid for it, it was quickly...
It was $600 for the resume writer to pay her. And I mean, to think about what you are getting from it, though, moving from one job to another job could increase your salary by 5, 10, 15, 20%.
Yeah.
So, this is a drop in the bucket compared to what you could get out of it. Like, you could easily recoup that if the resume helps you to get the interview, and then if you're able to use that interview to get the job, then it's like, yes, that was definitely an investment that was well worth it.
Yeah, so that in itself is an interesting way to look at it, because then you realize I don't need to do everything myself. I don't need to become a resume specialist. Mm-hmm. I just need somebody to represent me in the way that I feel like I need to be represented.
Yeah.
Because I struggled because I have, like internal conflict about expressing the work that I do. Mm-hmm. And
It's hard.
It's
hard
hard,
to
yeah.
talk about yourself, to say, I did this. And I remember even when you were working on that resume, we were having these conversations together of, okay, Damian, so what did you do? And when I was asking you these questions, it was a lot of, well, we did this, the company, and it was like, okay, they're not hiring the company.
Yeah.
They're not hiring the team you've been working for. They're trying to hire you. So you have to be able to talk about yourself. And I know that was something that was really hard to pull out of you.
Yeah.
So,
And it still is. I still consider a lot of the work that I do a team effort, because it's all, like the outcome of my output, even with you, right? I do all the audio stuff for this podcast, but I still say we, right?
Mm-hmm.
I always say we.
I think it's maybe a minority thing. This is a off story, but I'm gonna still tell it.
It's true.
There's this YouTube channel that I watch. I think it's called Fun and Budget with Tanisha. And when she's talking, she always says, we just got a hair appointment. Yes, we got it. We got in. And
it's just
obviously
her?
it's just her. But I think it's just a thing that we do. And it's funny because on her video recently, I said, why do we always say we just did this thing when we know it's only us? But yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So that's where I was coming from. And that's what made it hard for me. And when I say that, a professional can represent myself better in this way, it's because, of internal conflict, right?
I always think that some of my friends talk so highly of me. Like when I have a friend named Ashley in the neighborhood, and she'll tell people about me as a financial coach. And I'm like, oh, she's talking about me? Wait, what? And then even I'm doing some workshops for a small business here in Austin. And the other day I met the whole team, and one of the co-owners of the company was introducing me. And I was like, oh, wait, she's talking about me?
Yeah.
So it's very hard to say those things about yourself, but other people, it's so easy for them to say it. And so sometimes I try to take notes. What did she just say about me? Okay, yeah, I am that. So sometimes you need to hear someone else say it, but you didn't have that when you were going through this. So it was very much like you trying to figure out how to put those words to paper for yourself. And the resume writer was also very helpful in taking what you gave her and being able to use that. Yeah. But I want to fast forward a little bit. So you got the resume done, and then you put the application in with this very nice resume that you got from this lady, and you got an interview. Somehow they pulled
get an interview.
They pulled your name out of this stack of papers. And at that point, it was the next part of this preparation phase. Because again, one of the things that we had done before was in a previous interview, because you had interviewed for something else and it didn't work out. And a lot of that was very vague answers that you were giving, because we did some practice run-throughs before you went through, and it was you got to be more specific. You got to tell more about what you did. And so I'm gonna let you share, how were you able to prepare for the interview portions of the process?
The most important thing that I had was a buddy to practice with, to help me understand how I'm speaking, of the things that I do, that I can do, my abilities. And, my understanding of them is different than the way that I project them outwards, I think. And that's what you helped me to realize. You were my buddy. You were my buddy. So as my buddy, you listened and you gave me, the critical feedback that I needed to be able to redirect into what I actually wanted to say. Same with it's kind of the same as with the resume, but it was doing it live, right?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to stop you right there. So I do think I played a big part of it, but I think it was more of the resource I shared with you that was really helpful, because I got you into YouTube around that time.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is the type of interview you haven't. Look it up on YouTube. Go ask them, how do you answer this type of question? And so then you started doing that, and you went through 4 rounds of interviews. So
it was actually more. It was four difficult ones. It was 6 total. 4 of them were game face on kind of interviews. But YouTube was really, really helpful. And not because it was useful, because it helped me to understand the problem in its totality, the interviewing problem in whole.
Mm-hmm. And how to like frame your answers in a way that you could convey the message you needed them to hear.
Yeah. And there are other resources to do this. Like I know that a career coach is a kind of person that can help you with this as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I considered hiring a career coach in the same way that I considered a resume writer. But I just jumped on YouTube and I found the exact information that I was looking for.
Yeah, actually, the bank that we use, SoFi Bank, says that they have career coaches available. So I know we had talked about maybe you could, go through that and resource and connect with a career coach. But I think what we ended up doing was just you started using the YouTube videos to figure out how to answer those questions and how to bring up the stories and tell the stories in the interview process. And I think that was really helpful. The interview is obviously probably the most important part of the process,
mm-hmm.
because that's when you really demonstrate that you know what your resume says, and you're able to connect with those people on a personal level to hopefully move on to the next step. And so I don't know if people ever prepare for interviews in that way, but I remember you were like, you had your videos on every day before each interview. And it seemed like it was a long interview process. Like you interviewed every week for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot, but when I looked back on it, I was like, I actually think that was very helpful because each week you knew what type of interview was next. So then you could go and like prepare for that next interview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was actually really helpful the way that it was done, because I did have kind of a grace period to rehone my skills, really, to shape myself into my the way that I internalize myself,
mm-hmm.
and to be able to express that.
Yeah.
I'd been working for so long that I hadn't really, I don't think critically about that sort of thing. And, having gone through the process, it helped me to like firm up my understanding of that process, which would probably help
mm-hmm.
me anyway in the future for like reviews and stuff, like yearly reviews.
I think sometimes we get so accustomed to the work that we do that we don't see the relevance in it, or we don't see that the work we're doing is really great, because it's like, oh, it's for you. It's like a routine thing at this point. You know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But to someone else, like, no, you are doing excellent work that a lot of people cannot actually do.
Yeah, and it's weird because almost all of my yearly reviews were like exceeding expectations
mm-hmm.
for as long as I can remember, right? So like, I don't know why I still think, I can't phrase why I'm so great. It's weird. It's a weird conundrum, and that's the thing that you're talking about with like, maybe it's a minority thing, maybe it is.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. Anyhow, that has been the year-long process that we have gone through to go from number one, just the goal is to stay employed, to moving into a new job. And just to recap some of the highlights of the things that were helpful over that year was, number one, having an idea and thinking through where Damian wanted to move. So really asking those questions to try to dig into what type of position am I looking for? What's the next best move for me, and what do I want out of it? And then one of the other things was utilizing resources.
Yeah.
So paying for a resume writer, using YouTube and the videos that people have made on there of how to interview, how to answer questions, how to present yourself in the best way possible. And then also using a buddy.
Yeah.
Being able to talk through it with someone who can give you that real-time feedback. And and I think those are some of the highlights from that transition phase. And then obviously we've talked about the money of having that backup money just in case. There wasn't a lot of downtime between when you ended your job to when you transitioned into your new job. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks.
It was a week.
Was it a week you had off? It was 10 days. I think it was 10 days. because I think your last day was a Wednesday, and then you had one full week off, and then you started on that Monday. Yeah, so it was 10 days off. So not really a big deal for us when it comes to being prepared financially. But those are all of the highlights of how we were able to successfully transition to a new job.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would add to that?
I mean, it's been a year-long process. It's probably been more than a year in the making, to be honest, because we've intentionally padded our savings account to account for that, right? Mm-hmm. What if we need to switch jobs and all the what ifs?
Even though you be trying to make me invest that money, I'd be like, nope.
Yeah, I do. I do. And it's good that you don't listen to me, because I'm trying to be hyper optimal, but then that also bringing things back into balance gives us the grace to be able to do these kinds of things, right? Like, I need a change. I want to change, and let me explore all the landscapes of what I can do, mm-hmm. and to make it match what I want to do. And I found what I wanted to do. I'm super happy. I'm so glad that I found this new job, and I'm just so grateful.
Yay! Well, congratulations, Damian. And to those of you listening, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Join us for the next one, and let's make green together.
Let's make green together. Let's make green together.